A warm and friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we've got another conference preview edition as we're going to be taking a look at the American today, and there's nothing more American than taking a look at college basketball here in the middle of September and getting set for what is going to be a tremendous season. This is one of my favorite conferences, and for one of my favorite conferences, we need to get one of our favorite guests aboard. As Rob Donaldson, he does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2. We're going to be taking a look at all the rosters here in the American, a few coaching changes, including one that I know that he likes along with myself over at South Florida, and so much more. So we're going to be chatting about that with him and so much more. And then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector finish for the American. Well, here in number 1, we're going to take a look at the betting trends and just see styles that we've got here in the American. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, there's the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. With EdgeBoost, 100% of gambling transactions do get approved, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. And now let's dive in on an American that has been a very interesting conference over the last few seasons, in which you've got some up-tempo teams, you've got some super-duper slow teams as well. I'm looking at you, Charlotte, which it doesn't matter if it's Ron Sanchez there, if it's a current coaching regime. It's been one of these slower teams that we have found in all of college basketball. Charlotte, out of 364 Division I teams, they're right there towards the bottom in terms of total possessions per game once again last season, over at 283rd, and that was actually a little bit of an uptick from previous years. But I mean, East Carolina has been a little bit more of a mid-tempo team. They're about 190th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Going to be interesting to see what South Florida does this year. 66th in terms of total possessions per game. They've got Brian Hodgson coming on over from Arkansas State. Over at Arkansas State, he ran a pretty up-tempo style. They were right around about 70th in the country, so about as comparable as you can get, actually, in terms of overall tempos. Wichita State, ever since Paul Mills has been there, it's been a little bit up-down all around for them in terms of the way that they have played. They were about 100th in the country in terms of total possessions per game last year, approximately 97th. For tempo, we give our Ode to Lane Kiffin go Owls. They have been really trying to embrace three-point shooting, and they were up to 46th in the country in terms of total possessions per game last season, albeit a lot of impact from the fact that they played a ton of overtime games last season. Florida Atlantic was 68th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, so you do have a few more up-tempo teams in this conference, but you've obviously got a few teams that are pretty rock solid with regards to their defense, and then you've got a Memphis team that they like to be harebrained, crazy, 32nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. UAB dialed it back a little bit, but still about 69th in the country in terms of total possessions per game themselves, and UTSA, meet for the Roadrunners, 92nd in terms of total possessions per game. So you do have quite a few teams that are a little bit on the faster side of things. So Rice, we have our Ode to Lane Kiffin once again, go Owls. They were looking at dial it back at about 267th in the country, and with this conference, it just felt like the three-point shooting just was not necessarily the world's greatest at a lot of these schools. You had Memphis be a relatively solid three-point shooting team last year. For Memphis, they were canning right in the neighborhood about 37.6% of their threes. That was a top 25 mark in all of college basketball. As a matter of fact, that was number 22 in all of college basketball. And then you have Florida Atlantic be a solid three-point shooting team. They were about 108th in the country with regards to their three-point shooting percentage. But for Paul Mills, when he was really able to have success over at Oral Roberts, his teams were very good at being able to pop it from three. Wichita State was 339th in all of college basketball with regards to their three-point shooting percentage. East Carolina wasn't too far behind. They were 311th in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. I mentioned it with Temple. This is a team that they very much rely upon their three-point shooting, and they were solid last year. They were 69th, very nice in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. And then you had South Florida be a squad that was just a little bit all over the place last year. They were 287th in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. UTSA, I think that they're going to be a team that embraces the three quite a bit this year. year. They were 61st in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage, so you had a lot of intrigue with so many of these teams out there in the American. And then you got a North Texas team that's going to be completely different. North Texas, I forgot to mention, always one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball. Now they're going to get the Cleveland State coaching regime in there, and with regards to Cleveland State last season, they were a team that was a little bit more low-tempoed, and they were 239th in the country with regards to their three-point shooting percentage. So I do think that North Texas is still going to have quite a bit of an identity there, and North Texas was 60th in the country with regards to their three-point shooting percentage as well. And we're also noticing this with regards to the American as well. More and more teams are going to be looking to generate turnovers. Like I mentioned it with having Coach Robinson coming on over from Cleveland State. Cleveland State was 12th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. North Texas will probably be generating a few more turnovers. UTSA, meet me for the Roadrunners. They were 26th in the country with regards to turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Now it's a little bit of a divide between the haves and the have-nots. Either you were generating a lot of turnovers in this conference or you were generating none whatsoever. There weren't a lot of teams that were neither here nor there. As you take a look at some of these teams that were at the bottom, you just were not able to get Temple to generate too many turnovers, 314th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, albeit for a bunch in East Carolina. They were more around about 152nd, so they were that team that was a little bit more neither here nor there. And then with this Memphis bunch, they were a team that was just a bit all over the place with regards to their defense. You never know what you're going to be able to get out of them in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Last year, they were number 76 in all of college basketball. Wichita State was not generating a lot of turnovers. They were right around about 296th in all of college basketball in that regard. And Tulane, I think, is a very interesting team as well, as they have had a lot of different looks ever since they had Ron Hunter take over that program, and they were more around about 155th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, while UAB was 308th, and then you had 335th for Tulsa, a Tulsa team that has really been struggling on so many different side of things. We'll see if they're able to turn things around a little bit more this year, because I am thinking that we might see a little bit of better results there. And if you take a look at these teams against the spread and what they've been able to do, it's been very intriguing, as Memphis always comes in with very high expectations, but typically they get a little bit overvalued in the market. And Memphis against the spread last season, they're a bunch that they just weren't able to cover too much for you. They went 16-19 against the spread. South Florida, just with everything that went down, you had Abdul Rahim, their coach, die before the start of the season. I mean, that was just a horrible situation. You wish those kids absolutely nothing but the best, and nothing but the best to Abdul Rahim and his family. They went 9-22 against the spread. That was one of the most visible marks in all of college basketball. Florian Lank was 12-21 against the spread after they had to try to pick up the pieces with a new coaching regime after Dusty May goes on over to Michigan. You really only had 3 profitable teams. You have to hit at least 52.38% against the spread on a -110 spread to be profitable. UTSA 15-12-2 against the spread. Rice Go Owls 16-14-1 against the spread, and then UAB was 19-17 against the spread. Wichita State break even 15-15-3. Charlotte was 16-16. Tulane, Temple, they were both 15-16 and 15-16-1 respectively, and North Texas 16-15-3 against the spread. But this is a very spread out conference. Like, you've got schools in the Carolinas, you've got schools in the Floridas, you've got Wichita, Kansas that is all represented. So, I mean, it's a spread out conference. It's not quite like the Big Ten or anything like that, but as a result, we did see quite a bit of funky bunch travel, and we did see quite a few of these teams actually do a relatively surprisingly good job on the road as a result, as you only had 3 teams cover less than 50% of their games away from home. South Florida was 5-7 against the spread on the road. Tulane 4-6-1 against the spread away from home. Florida Atlantic was 5-8 against the spread. Now, it wasn't like these were super duper profitable teams. Like Wichita State and Rice both went 7-5 against the spread on the road. UTSA 9-6 against the spread on the road. North Texas 7-4-2 against the spread on the road. But then East Carolina 5-4-1 against the spread on the road. Charlotte, UAB 7-6 against the spread on the road. Temple and Memphis were both break even at 500. So these teams were a little bit better away from home, and that's mainly because you just had these teams in the conference really struggle as favorites. Nobody covered more than 50% of their games as a favorite. UAB was your best team in the role of a favorite at 13-13 against the spread. North Texas 11-12-3 against the spread as a favorite. Florian Lank 11-12-1 against the spread as a favorite, but Charlotte was 2-7. South Florida 4-11. Temple 4-10. Go Owls 3-6 for UTSA. Rice was 5-8. Memphis was 10-16. East Carolina 7-10-2 against the spread as a favorite. Wichita State 8-11-2. These teams just really struggled in the role of a favorite. And then out there in the American, you had some very high-flying teams of the over. As a matter of fact, Temple was your second best over team in all of college basketball. 23 overs to 8 unders. Only Lemoyne had a higher percent of their games go over the total. A lot of that was because they had a bunch of overtime games. Now, you had a lot more calm teams out there, and you did have two very good teams to the under. Wichita State, because they couldn't hit threes, 13 overs to 20 unders. South Florida, 10 overs to 21 unders. Again, team that really didn't shoot it well from three. And then you had Tulsa and Tulane go 15-16 and 15-16 and 1 to the over with 15 overs, 16 unders, and a push. And then Florida Atlantic, 17 overs, 16 unders. Rice, 16 overs, 15 unders. Memphis, 18 overs, 16 unders, and a push. UAB, 19 overs, 16 unders, and a push. Charlotte, 18 overs, 14 unders. East Carolina, 18 overs, 13 unders. And UTSA, 17 overs to 12 unders. So after Temple, I mean, it wasn't really anything overly demonstrative in terms of a big boom or a big bust with regards to the overs. And if you look at conference play, it was once again relatively even Steven aside from Temple. 16 out of their 19 conference games went over the total. East Carolina and Tulane both had 12 overs to 8 unders. UTSA and Rice both had 10 overs to 9 unders. And then you had break even 10 and 10 for North Texas, Tulsa, and Charlotte to the over. UAB and Memphis played one more under than over. For Florida Atlantic, Wichita State, 12 unders to 8 overs, and then South Florida, 13 unders to 6 overs. So a very interesting conference, to say the least, with a big giant outlier in Temple. We'll see if they are going to be that once again this season, and it is going to be a fun conference to be able to decipher. Rob Donaldson, he does such amazing work over at the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's been joining me all off season long. He's going to join me next to take a look at all these rosters, the coaching changes, and so much more right here on Cuss Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, the American Conference Preview Edition. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Cuss Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is the American Conference Preview Edition, and how about if we get on a all-American man, as we've got ourselves Rob Donaldson aboard. He does a great job with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. Now, that's not as bad as when I do the Conference USA preview, because that's Miley Cyrus's favorite conference. That's a party in Conference USA right there. But that said, lots of puns here, and we've got a punny man who he does a tremendous job taking a look at this great game of baseball. He does a tremendous job as well taking a look at everything that we're getting in college basketball, getting set for the upcoming college basketball season. Follow his work over at youtube.com/Rob Donaldson and on Twitter/X at RobDFB. And Rob, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, man. And the American is one of those conferences that technically has the billing of a mid-major, but in some years can really feel like it's one on the kind of level of like the A10 or Mountain West, where you have a stacked league with multiple kind of arguments for a two-bid league. And I really do like that kind of layout, especially when you're talking about these leagues. And there's a number of teams this year that are in the middle of the pack historically that I really do think it'll launch up this season.
Yep, absolutely. And how about if we do take a look at one of those interesting teams, because I know that you've been quite bullish on this team. It is Wichita State, and let's call it what it is. Wichita State is going to be a new-look team, and I don't think that that's the world's worst thing. Outside the top 330 in terms of three-point shooting percentage, we both know Paul Mills from his time at Oral Roberts. Typically, his Oral Roberts teams were really good three-point shooting teams, bringing in Keenan Giles and Karan Boyd, who were over there in the SoCon Conference last year, should be able to help out. I have a little bit of a fear with depth, and I think that Jared Valencia needs to get back to the three-point shooting they had 2 seasons ago over at Monmouth, but I just feel like this is a little bit of a better blend than what Paul Mills had the last few seasons, as those just didn't feel like Paul Mills coached teams over at Wichita State the last few years.
It really felt like what was going on with Paul Mills the last 2 seasons was, hey, let's accumulate talent. Let's try to build sort of that winning culture and forget about the prototypes or what stylistic guys I want at certain spots. Let's just go out there and formulate enough talent to win games in a very tough league. And we saw, that to an extent where they did make the NIT. They obviously went from 15 wins in year 1 of Paul Mills to 19 wins in year 2. Now it's at year 3, sort of building block, prove it year. I do feel like the success from last year did give them a kind of a leg up in terms of acquiring some talent in this portal cycle. And yeah, I am very bullish on Paul Mills. I'm very bullish on a lot of these kind of year 3 coaches that fall into that same tier. And this is about the same time when we saw Oral Roberts turn it up when they were, in the Summit League. It was year 3, year 4 with Max Asmus at Oral Roberts when we really saw Paul Mills hit his stride. And I think the same could be this season here with Wichita State.
Yep, and with Wichita State, I think that they're going to be one of the more fascinating teams in the conference. And if I'm looking at a team that has perhaps the most pressure on them this year, I actually think that it's Tulane. Obviously, Memphis always has a lot of pressure on them, but this feels like a put up or shut up year for Ron Hunter because he returns three rock solid guys. Greg Glenn, Asher Woods, Alonzo Brumba from a season ago. Scotty Middleton is a nice upside guy who comes on over from Seton Hall and Ohio State where he saw some good minutes. Percy Daniels is a 6'9" big man, but I have a little bit of a fear in terms of the depth. They're probably going to need someone like a KJ Green to be able to step up a little bit more. Want to get your thoughts on Tulane because it feels like that has been the hallmark of this Tulane team where they typically have a good starting five, and then after that, you just don't have a lot of depth.
And the issue with Ron Hunter at Tulane is this is going to be a guy who coaches until the day he dies, right? He's just a basketball lifer in the same way that Fran Dumphy, a type like that was, where I don't think he'll ever truly leave the game, but he may move on from Tulane because the reality of this situation where he's in, this area that doesn't really have a rich basketball culture at this program. And he's been sort of the guy who's like, hey, I'm going to jump up in the crowd, come out to this big game against Houston. Let's take a look and get this fan base riled up. And he has had some marginal success in kind of getting the fan base invigorated, but it doesn't really feel like the administration is too crazy about investing in the program. And even the fan support has kind of been wishy-washy, even when they've had success over the last 3 years. And so I think this is a really big year in terms of, hey, can Tulane ever hit that next level or next stride? Or is this who they are? And I do feel like the talent is there. It's just a matter of the wins accumulating, and even more notably, the wins accumulating over the big brands in this conference and out.
Absolutely, and I do think that it's going to be very fascinating because I look at this Tulane team and I just feel like it's the same thing that we've seen in the past. Some relatively good top-end production, a nice starting five, but what are you going to be able to get after that? As joining me on the show, we do have Rob Donaldson. He does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's joining me right here on Cusco Soups, and this team I think is going to be so interesting as Danielle Robinson is now the new head coach over at North Texas, taking over for Mr. Hodge, who had done a relatively rock-solid job there. He goes on over to West Virginia, and he brings with him a guy like a Dylan Arnett, who was over at Cleveland State with him a season ago, and Cleveland State was really good in terms of generating turnovers. Not a super-duper up-tempo team. Now, I don't know if they're going to be back in the bottom five in terms of total possessions per game, but it's lasted through multiple coaching regimes, going all the way back to Greg McCaslin, so maybe it will. But how do you take a look at a North Texas team that, let's call it what it is? You got a few guys coming on over from Cleveland State, but this is a brand spanking new team. But as we know, Cleveland State has went through a few coaching changes, and they really haven't taken a drop off with any of them.
Yeah, and what I really do like about the dynamic of coaches who have a Cleveland State-esque program in their background, where when you look at their teams over the Daniel Robinson era, they haven't had that one dude who's like, oh, he's just crazy athletic. He's an amazing shooter. He's the best in the conference. That's why they're successful. It felt like every single year at Cleveland State, he was rebuilding the entire roster from the ground up and finding just a bunch of dudes who could hoop and winning 20-plus games per season. I feel like if that's your formula of, one, roster building, and also two, finding consistent success, well, guess what? I think you can probably do that at almost any program, let alone a program like North Texas that does have that investment in basketball, does have a track record of being successful in a league where I really do feel like they're one of the notable brands that could just year over year compete at the highest level. And so there's a lot of pessimism with a lot of first-year head coaches across the board, but Daniel Robinson is one of those guys that I think has a higher floor than most. And so I do kind of like North Texas going into this season.
Yep, and with North Texas, it's going to be such an interesting dynamic with them because they've always had that identity of being a slow grinder team, and I don't know if they're going to quite be in the bottom 10 in terms of total possessions per game, but certainly going to be a fascinating bunch. And this is a team I just feel really bullish about. They bring back quite a bit from season ago. It's UTSA. Meet for the Roadrunners, as you've got yourself a guy in Austin Clontry, I think is one of the more underrated coaches in all of college basketball. Primo Spears was a 20-point per game scorer last season. Vashawn Allowette was a Big 12 starter last year. They bring back Raquan Horton. Jameer Simpson began his career at UW Parkside, the lone Division II university in the state of Wisconsin, by the way. The depth might be lacking a little bit, but Austin Nunez, I think, is a little bit of an upside guy. Am I crazy to think that UTSA could be in the upper half of the conference this year? Because it feels like nobody's talking about them. I feel like these guys are hiding in plain sight, and I really like what Austin Claus is bringing to the table.
Honestly, Austin Claunch was one of the best hires, I think, possible for a program like a UTSA because in his trajectory as a coach has really been, I don't even know how to kind of frame it. He was a coach at Nichols and he was having a lot of success at Nichols. Like they were first and second in the conference every single year, seemingly during a 5 year, 6 year window. He decided, you know what? I'm going to move on from this head coaching job, but I'm going to partner up with Nate Oates at Alabama. I'm not going to jump to another head coaching job, which is an upgrade, which he easily could have pulled off. He just decided, hey, I want to put some more skill in my bag. I want to hone my abilities as a head coach, as a recruiter, whatever else. And he took that immediately to UTSA last season, where he made an absolute wave in the portal. And yeah, 12-19, that's not going to jump out, but they were competitive in a lot of games that UTSA normally wouldn't be competitive in. And to your point, they are bringing back a number of guys. They have a lot of talent as well and a lot of scoring talent just from that Nate Oates Nichols style. And I really do think that UTSA here in year two under Clonch could be a really dark horse kind of team to emerge in the top three of the conference.
Right there with you. I am feeling very good about UTSA. I think that this is a team that has a chance to be able to boom. I don't quite know if this team has a chance to be able to boom, though, as I really like Michael Schwartz as a coach. He does a nice job of being able to coach defense. He was a disciple of Rick Barnes, but I take a look at the East Carolina roster right now, and it's looking a little bit bare. Just Sean Woodyard, he's back from a season ago. He's going to be able to help things out, but I mean, so many of those guys, because they had a core three that were all able to give the team 15-plus points per contest, they're gone. So Isaiah Mbeg, who comes out over from William and Mary, and Giovanni Amaruju, they're going to need to step up. And I just don't know if they necessarily have the depth to be able to compete for one. And two, I'm very much questioning who's going to be bringing up the ball for this team because they don't seem to have too much of a point guard on the roster.
You know, maybe you and I are going to be a little bit unfair, Greg, to Michael Schwartz because year three, which is a building block year, they did see a steady improvement to get to 19 wins. But, like, I'm sure you kind of feel similarly. When we've watched East Carolina over the last 3 years, one, it never feels like they have guard play that excites. And two, it always kind of feels like they're non-competitive in games against the higher sort of brands in the conference or even out of conference. And what's really acceptable at East Carolina or ECU? You know, is it just kind of sit in the middle, maybe kind of the higher end bottom tier of this conference, or do they want to compete? If it's the latter, and it should be the latter, I don't know if Michael Schwartz is necessarily the guy. And at the very least, what I can definitively say is this is a massive prove-it year for him and the program, and I just don't know if I'm a believer just yet until I actually see it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm just not feeling necessarily great about them. I am feeling a little bit better about them than I am feeling about Charlotte, though, as for this coaching regime, they had to take over after Ron Sanchez left for Virginia, actually became the interim head coach over at Virginia last season. That was quite the turn of events. But that said, I take a look at this Charlotte team, and Dezane Mingo was rock solid over at Marshall last year. Major Freeman, I mean, that's a great name. He was pretty good over at Siena, but now you're relying about Ethan Butler coming on over from Northern Illinois. Caleb Blackwell, solid player over at Alabama A&M. Alabama A&M in the SWAC, not quite the same level of competition as the American. They really don't have a lot of size other than Khalil Mading, who comes on over from Norfolk State, where he was averaging 5 rebounds per game. This team doesn't have a ton down low. The guard play with Mingo, I think that he could be solid, but outside of that, I look at this Charlotte team. They play slowly, but they don't play good defense. They didn't have great three-point shooting last year. They don't look to have that once again. I don't know what this team really does really well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. And again, sometimes it can feel like we're being harsh on these guys who, in the case of Aaron Fern, are going into year three. But the calling card of the great coaches that we see build up to year three is steady improvement with wins, or at least kind of stagnating good level of wins. And with Charlotte going from 19 wins in year one to 11 wins in year two under Fern, now that we're kind of in the hindsight window is, hey, year one, he probably benefited from Ron Sanchez leaving last second and kind of giving him a good roster right out the gate. And what did he end up doing with it? Well, they go 11-22 and 3-15 in conference the very next season. And now, they are turning over a lot of different minutes now. And I think sometimes when you do have that kind of disastrous season, it's actually a good thing to not bring back the minutes that were leading to those non-wins. But I don't really want to buy into Charlotte again until I kind of see it, and I don't know if I'm going to see it from Aaron Fern in this bunch.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I do think that it's going to be a bit of a rough go of it for them, as Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Vets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I know a lot of people are going to pick this team towards the bottom of the conference. I think Tulsa has a little bit of upside with them. You've got a guy in Eric Conkle who had a really good track record of success over at Louisiana Tech. Honestly, I'm a little bit surprised that he's getting another opportunity here, but you know what? I look at what he brought in. Terrence Biltford Tough was over at Arkansas State. He's got familiarity with one of the coaches in the conference. I think he's going to elevate this backcourt. Miles Barnstable was a bucket getter when he was over at St. Thomas. David Green was low-key a really good three-point shooter over at Rhode Island. Doran Onetshewa, hopefully I said that correct, when he was over at Georgia Tech before getting injured. He was able to pull in some rebounds. Ian Smichael had some nice moments last year. Tulsa actually has some relatively good depth. I still think Eric Conkle knows how to coach. I feel like Tulsa could be that surprise team that actually wins like 19, 20 games this year.
It wouldn't surprise me if we saw a bump. And to your point, it's almost like you get a longer leash based on your track record, which I think that's actually how it should go when you're a program like Tulsa, as opposed to a program like an Alabama or a Duke or North Carolina, where the leash is very, very tight. But we've already seen a lot of mid-major success in the Conference USA out of Eric Conkle. It was kind of surprising, honestly, when he took this job in the first place at Tulsa. But right now, you have to understand, like 3 years ago, they won 5 games. So 13 wins last season, although it's kind of a fall short of expectations sort of deal, after it felt like they were really building on something, it's not a complete setback. And obviously, through the portal and just the retention of some of these guys, they do have some dogs who I think can actually play within the American Conference. And yeah, to your point, why not a team like Tulsa to maybe over exceed expectations, at least from a betting angle and from a standings perspective in the American? I could totally see 18 or 19 wins here in year 4.
Yes, absolutely. I am very bullish on this Tulsa team, and this is a team that I take a look at, and I just don't know if it's going to happen for them because I was very much in on the coach Adam Fisher regime over at Temple. It just feels like it's hit a skid. Really, the main guy that they bring back from last season is Shane Dezzoni, and they've got some upside in the backcourt. Jordan Mason was solid over at UIC. They bring in Messiah Gilliard. I think that he's going to be solid. Darren Biltford Tough, he's a guy that began his career over at Arkansas and Arkansas State. But that said, I take a look at this Temple team. Without Jamal Mashburn Jr. out there on the floor, this team was miserable. And for Temple, they're not going to have a lot of rebounding. And I just don't know if Fisher is able to put his imprint on the team. And maybe he was riding the coattails a little bit too much of Micah Shrewsbury when he was an assistant over at Penn State to land this job.
Well, here's where I think you and I are actually going to first differ on this podcast, because I think that when you're looking at Adam Fisher and just the success they were able to find in year 2 within the conference late, it did kind of feel like they were building on something. And, even looking over the year-over-year conference record, starting year 1, 5-13 in the American, that jumped to 9-9 with a 7th place finish last season. And their overall win total jumped from 16 to 17 as well. And there were a lot of things that kind of transpired last year where the talent accumulation felt like they should have a little bit more success than what they actually ended up experiencing. But I do kind of buy into Temple being one of those teams that takes a pretty large leap here and has a chance to get into the top 5 of the conference. And also, when you're looking at retention of minutes, that is there coming into the season as well. And I do feel like there's enough talent. We haven't really seen Adam Fisher just sort of operate a full season at, this sort of expectation level. And so here in year 3, call me a little bit of a believer in the Temple Owls. I think this could be a nice little resurgence season.
Yep, and with Temple, we still remember 2 years ago where they were absolutely awful to begin with, and then they made it to like the American Conference Final after they went through a gambling scandal. After the gambling scandal, they were covering everything. So that was interesting to say the least. I don't think we're going to get that once again, and let's hope we don't get that once again, but I think this is one where we're not going to differ. I think that we're both very much in on Andy Kennedy as a coach over at UAB. Now, trying to replace the XL Lendyborg, don't call his name Alejandro Kirk, is going to be rough, but I like the transfers that they brought in. K-Ron Lindsey, when he left Georgia a few years ago, he was actually their top rebounder and just never found his footing over at Murray State. Ephraim Johnson is that main returner from a season ago. Ahmad Robinson is a do-it-all guard. Jacob Meyer is a guy that was able to put up some good numbers over at DePaul. Daniel Rivera, I think, fits this system so well. Chance Westry has some upside as well. It feels like this team has relatively good depth. And if I'm looking at the coaching in the conference, guy that I never want to bet against is Andy Kennedy, going all the way back to his time at Ole Miss. He's always done more with less.
In some of these conferences, as you and I have kind of picked up on going through all of them here, there are some main constants within conferences. And obviously, when you're looking at UAB, Andy Kennedy, not only at UAB, but just throughout his entire coaching sort of career, there's been a lot of consistent winning and success. And, whether it was Jelly Walker a few years ago, where it was, can we move on from this dynamic guard who's one of the best guards in the entire country and find a way to continue to have success? Well, then they found Yaxel Lendeborg, and all of a sudden now he's a very wanted player by both the NBA, by Michigan. And I do feel like if there's any coach you can just kind of blindly trust to bring in the right pieces and talent to sort of mold them to the way that it's going to fit in this offense, I think Andy Kennedy is 100% the guy. And yeah, to your point, one of the dudes who you can just definitely count on, and I do expect UAB to be in that mix once again this season.
Yep, absolutely. They seem to always be there, and there's no reason to think that they're not going to be there once again, as they have been rock solid in this conference. And what else has been rock solid in this conference is having Memphis towards the top of it, and Memphis typically underachieving because you look on paper, this is by far the most talented team in the conference. You bring in Doug McDaniel, a nice double-figure scorer over at Michigan and Kansas State. Aaron Bradshaw is a former top 20 recruit who's just been derailed by injury. Hassan Abdul-Hakim was one of the most, shall we say, versatile mid-major players in all of college basketball over at UT Rio Grande Valley. Unfortunately, got hurt. Quante Berry knows all about the conference. He was over at Temple. Sincere Parker is a nice go-to scorer from St. Louis, along with the East. Zachary Davis is going to be rock solid for this team. Tariq Ingram. You just go down the list, but Penny Hardaway, I just have a feeling is going to find a way to screw this up because they should win the conference, and I have a bad feeling that they're not going to.
Yeah, and that is sort of the Penny Hardaway staple, is there's always a high floor at them, right, in terms of actually winning, because when you have this much talent year over year over year, no matter how you go about accumulating it, by the way, sometimes it's not necessarily the most legal in terms of the ways that these players end up at Memphis.
Good, clean family fun.
Yeah, good, clean family fun. And what I'll say about Penny Hardaway is they can always put up points. They always seem to kind of be gelling together in terms of the personalities that they bring in, which you can't say about some other programs that just talent hoard and end up just kind of falling apart at the seams because nobody knows how to gel. Nobody knows how to move the ball. With Penny Hardaway, they're always going to drop that one game that just makes you just scratch your head over and over again, and they'll probably underachieve in the tournament. But when it comes to the actual American and being successful and being there until the end, they're probably going to be there until the end, especially with this much talent. And I'm not going to go full hog and say Memphis, this is the year, because I just don't think it's going to be the year. But when you're talking about just them winning in general, I do think they're going to find ways to at least win some games this season.
Oh, they're going to win some games this year, but I don't know if they're going to win as many games as this team, because I take a look at what South Florida has built. I really love the hire of Coach Hodgson coming on over from Arkansas State. He brings with him a few guys from Arkansas State. Joseph Pignon, who was a former top 150 recruit, bombed it well from three. Isaiah Nelson, rock solid player down low. And then Joshua Omajafo was really good over at Robert Morris last season. Xavier Brown, a go-to scorer over at James Madison. Damian Collins saw good minutes over at LSU as a former top 75 recruit. Isaiah Jones is going to do some nice things, and they maintain their 6'10" big man from a season ago, Deontay Green, who began his career over at Florida State. They did a nice job on the recruiting front. I look at South Florida, and I really like the depth. I really like the way that the pieces come together. And Brian Hodgson, I think that he just knows ball.
Yeah, Brian Hodgson was one of my favorite coaches last season coming into the year. Arkansas State obviously saw a lot of success. They barely missed out on just winning the Sun Belt and getting an automatic bid to the tournament. Probably should have won it, if we're being honest, based on how they started the Sun Belt championship game. But hey, they made it to the NIT, made it to the second round. And when you are looking at South Florida and just the talent accumulation, it just shows you why a coach like a Brian Hodgson goes from a Sun Belt school in Arkansas State to a program like a South Florida, which, if you're unaware of the college basketball hierarchy, you might look at it and say, mid-major to mid-major, that's kind of a lateral move. But no, when you're USF, when you're bought into basketball and you have the ability to recruit guys in the state of Florida, I think this is a great opportunity for a guy like a Brian Hodgson. And I think right out the gate, they're going to experience a lot of success in terms of the actual wins as well.
Absolutely. As joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, we do have one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson of the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bet, says we do take a look at this conference, and we've got some owls to take a look at, and we give our own Delane Kiffin on this one because we look at the Florida Atlantic Owls. I still remember that ad. That was one of the most hilarious things ever. But with Florida Atlantic, I feel like the top end talent is here. AJ Stanton McCray was really good a few years ago over at Stanford, was over at Miami, and still saw some good run there. Cannon Carlisle had like a 10-game run at Stanford where he looked like one of the best players in all of college basketball. Absolutely awful at Indiana last year. But we've seen both good and bad. Cannon Carlisle is probably somewhere between A and B. Nicolo Moretti was a nice solid guard for the team last year as well. This team is going to be very suspect down low with not having Bob Miller back. I do fear that this team is a little bit top heavy, but having Carlisle, Moretti, and McCray, I think that alone should be able to drag this team towards the middle of the conference. And I feel like the way that they have been able to replace Dusty May, I know that it didn't go well in season number 1, but I think they're doing it the right way.
And again, when we're talking about just the coaches that you kind of look for at these types of levels, a lot of them are going to be linked to Scott Drew in some capacity, is what it kind of feels like. And here we go. John Jacobs, one of the other guys who's linked to Scott Drew. And when you are looking at last season, based on expectations for FAU, I don't really even know how to really judge them, because obviously they were coming off the Dusty May era. They were coming off of some crazy runs that Florida Atlantic had never seen, and stepping into those shoes, kind of like, Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer, and why everybody wants to fire Kalen DeBoer in the sport of college football at Alabama. When you're filling the shoes of a legend and filling the shoes of the guy at a program, it can be pretty daunting. And so to go in there, get fifth place in the American, win 18 games, compete with some of the best teams in the conference, I feel like all in all, it was a very, very good season. And this season, I do expect them to get back into shape, even without Baba Miller. And I also kind of look at this team in terms of the talent that they actually accumulated, and I know they're going to be able to push the pace. So I'm not overly crazy about FAU, but I do think they're going to experience a little bit of a jump, even in comparison to last season.
Yep, I am right there with you, and I do think that just top-end talent is going to be so big for them in general. And then I take a look at the Rice Owls, and I think that it's such a fascinating team because they do bring back Jalen Smith, and that's a big cog because he came on over with Rob Lanier from SMU. He missed the entirety of last season due to injury, but now it's going to be a little bit of mix and match from, shall we say, some up transfers. Andrew Akuchi is back from a season ago as well. Nick Anderson was very rock solid over at Prairie View, but Prairie View, that's a big jump there. Dallas Hobbs, nice guard over at Mount St. Mary's in the Metro Atlantic. That's going to be a big bump as well. And for Rob Lanier, a lot of people felt like he got unrightfully canned over at SMU. I was one of those guys, but I feel like he faces an uphill battle over here at Rice because I think that he's a rock-solid coach, but I just don't know if he's got the horses to be able to get this team even towards the middle of the conference because it just feels like Rice is one of those programs that they really don't care about basketball, and I hate to say it, but guy got a raw deal over at SMU, and it just feels like he's in a bad circumstance right now with Rice.
That's exactly how I feel as well, where I get it. They wanted to make a move that was going to really excite the crowd, especially in the NIL era. And they felt like, hey, if we bring in a new face, we can probably bring in more talent. We're going to really invest in NIL for our new guy in Andy Enfield. And, we'll see what goes on with SMU here in year 2 of that experiment. But I do feel like when you're looking at Rob Lanier, this is a guy that can go into any program and have a baseline. And sometimes when you're talking about, a mid-major like a Rice that doesn't have sort of that pedigree or a ton of program success, you just want to have a strong baseline and have the potential upside for more. To your point, not a team that I'm overly bullish on here in the preseason, standing here in September, but once I kind of see them play a few games, I think we're going to have a really good handle on how good they can potentially be. And if the athletes are there and the upside is there just from him being the head coach, it might be a team that once we're kind of in the month of December or late November, all of a sudden we are kind of finding some value in down the stretch.
Such a big key for them, just being able to reduce on those turnovers that it felt like were so costly for them last season as well. So I do perhaps see a little bit of upside here with Rice. They're going to be an interesting team, and this is going to be a really fun conference. Rob, we have ran through all 13 teams out there in the American. I know you're doing an amazing job getting set for the upcoming college basketball season, and in the interim, you're doing an incredible job taking a look at the baseball front as well. So love the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, always love talking ball with you, my man, and goodness, I think we're right now sitting here 50 days away from college basketball being back in our lives, maybe even less than that. I'm not even entirely sure, but I know it's on the horizon, and I can't wait until we're actually breaking down games. And for those who want to follow my bets going into college basketball season or Major League Baseball, NFL, college football, you can do so on my Twitter/X page at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
And Rob is just such a master at taking a look at this great game of college basketball. He's joined me for a few conference previews. Every single time he joins this show, lends such incredible insights, and did so once again today. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast, since it is the American Conference Preview Edition, that I give you my projector or finish for all 13 teams out here in the American. Here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to get Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such an amazing job with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. He did so once again today. So big thanks to Rob for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the American, as per usual, because I am doing a conference preview today. That means that any news I miss in college basketball on Monday, that'll be polished up on the podcast tomorrow. I always want to make sure that these are evergreen podcasts, so whether you're listening in the middle of September, late October, just anytime to be able to get set for the upcoming season, you're able to do so. You're able to get a nice, clean podcast, and we always want to give these conferences as much sparkle and shine as humanly possible. Now, let's get into it with my projector or finish at dead last at number 13. I am going to be going with Charlotte. This team really doesn't return a lot from a team that last season wasn't that great. Now, Major Freeman and Dezane Mingo, they are going to be leading this backcourt, but this is just not a great style with Charlotte. They were one of the slower teams in all of college basketball once again last year. They've always had this slow style ever since Ron Sanchez was there. Aaron Farine was just unable to get things online for this team last season. I just don't know if he is ever going to be able to. They were a nice paltry 11-23 last season, and this team wasn't really good on offense or on defense. They play slow, but it's not like they play good defense. Like, you take a look at their defensive numbers in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and this team was miserable because they don't generate any turnovers. Charlotte last year was 327th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. If you look at their actual scoring on offense, that wasn't too effective either. Now, they do a little bit of a better job of taking care of the ball than most teams, but they don't necessarily get good shots out of it. Last season, in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, they were right around about 190th, so that's a little bit of an issue for you as well. You don't have a ton of size down low. As a matter of fact, Kual Mading is pretty much the only guy in the roster that's above 6'7". He was able to put in there like 5-6 rebounds last year. Over at Norfolk State, they're going to be relying upon Ethan Butler, who, I mean, he was solid over at Northern Illinois, but Northern Illinois was not a part of a winning team either. I just don't really see it with this team unless if Caleb Blackwell just has an amazing season after he comes over from Alabama A&M, and that's a much lower level of competition. So in my projector finish at dead sinking last, I have to go with Charlotte. At number 12, I go with Rice. We go with the Delane Kiffin as well. Go Owls, but for Rice, I just don't really see it. Like, I always thought that Rob Lanier was an okay coach. I feel like maybe the love went a little bit too far with him in terms of him when he got canned over at SMU, and last season it was very much a struggle. Now, you're number one, you're always just looking to be able to instill your style, things of that nature, and he does have Nick Anderson in the fold, as Nick Anderson last season when he was over at Prairie View. It was a small sample size, but I mean, he was a 19 point per game scorer, but still, is that going to be able to translate into the American? He was grabbing for the team about 5 rebounds per game as well. And then you look at Jalen Smith, he's a guy that actually played with him over at SMU, missed the entirety of last season. I don't know if that was injury or what, but I mean, 5.5 points. He was able to give the team a little bit of facilitation. Solid three-point shooter at 35.5%. And for Rice, you could tell that this was a team that was fighting hard last season. That's one thing that I will give them. The defense was much better for them last season, but I just don't know really where the scoring is going to be coming from. Again, Nick Anderson was a really nice scorer at the lower level. I just don't know if he's going to be able to elevate and if he's going to be able to uplift a Rice team that was well outside the top 250 in terms of their ball security, and we're only 198th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis last season. They have some okay rebounding. Andrew Akuchi, he's back from a season ago. He should be able to help this team out a little bit more down low, but when I take a look at this Rice team, it's one that I just have question marks in terms of that point guard spot. I think that is going to be a big sticking point for them. It's a Rice team that they were very solid on the offensive glass last season, but a lot of those guys are gone from a season ago, and they don't generate any turnovers whatsoever. So, with regards to my projector finish, at number 12, I do have to go with Rice. Number 11, East Carolina. Now, I do think that Michael Schwartz is a very rock-solid coach, and Giovanni Amaruju is going to be able to give this team some rough and tumble down low. They really need to improve the three-point shooting. This was one of the worst three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. Amaruju obviously not going to be able to do so. Last year over at George Mason, solid player, 6 points, 4 boards. When he was a starter at Siena 2 seasons ago, he was able to put up a little bit over 6 rebounds per game, so that's a good mark for this team. But for East Carolina, they do lose really the heart and soul pieces from a season ago. RJ Felton, CJ Walker, all those double-figure scorers are gone, so now just Shane Woodard, who was able to give you like 6 points, 4 boards, 2 assists. He was a little bit of a gadget guy at 6'7", so he's going to be able to stuff the Sachi. He's going to help out, but again, you just don't have any guys that really shot threes from a season ago back for this team. You've got Isaiah Embig, who I think is a relatively nice upside guy. He comes on over from you don't just get William, you don't just get Mary, but you get both. But even for Embig, it's not like he was like the guy that was taking things over at William and Mary last year. 5.5 points per contest, shot 32% from three-point range, was able to give out about 3.5 assists per contest. So the turnover issues that East Carolina had last season, those should be better. But Trevon Lebu, he's back from season ago, shot 35.5% from three. He's going to need to do that in a bigger role, but I knew as a starter that averaged 3 points and 4 rebounds per game. So I do think that for East Carolina, really that backcourt play, the overall offense is going to be rough. They're going to be able to play some good defense. They're going to be gritty, but in the end, I just don't see them getting a lot of W's. So I've got East Carolina at number 11 in terms of my projector finish. At number 10, I go with Temple. We give our ode to Lane Kiffin, go Owls, and they've got a mismatch of guys I think are going to be rock solid in the backcourt. I do like Jordan Mason and the fact that he comes on over from Texas State, and this is a bunch that just you need a really good three-point shooting with this team, and I'm not sure if they're going to have that. For Jordan Mason, began his career at Texas State last year. Most recently was at Illinois Chicago. He was putting up about 9.5 points per contest. His best year, though, was at Texas State, where he had more like 13 points per game. He'll be able to give this team some facilitation with about 3.5 assists per game, because that's one thing that I really noticed without Jamal Mashburn Jr. out there on the floor. They really didn't have any of that, and Gavin Griffiths, he's a former top 100 guy that spent some time at Rutgers and Nebraska. Actually had a relatively solid freshman season over at Rutgers, just wasn't able to get out there on the floor last year at Nebraska, but not a guy that's going to really light you up from three-point range. They just don't have a ton down low for this team, as Jemai Felt is like the only guy on the roster with experience above 6'8". Griffiths is the only other guy that's above 6'6". Felt, he was over at Bowling Green last year. It's not like he saw a magnificent amount of minutes or anything like that. Shane Dezzoni, he's back from a season ago, and I do like Darian Bilford Tough as well. I do think that he's going to be a nice contributor for the team, but at this point, I'm just questioning the Adam Fisher style. He was coaching over at Penn State with Micah Shrewsbury. I'm wondering if he was just riding those coattails. Now, Ford, 8 points, right around about 3.5 boards last season over at Arkansas State as a part-time starter. Career about 35% three-point shooter, which is solid. And Shane Dezzoni, he's been with this program for quite a while. 8 points, 5 boards for his career, is about a 37% three-point shooter. That toilet bowl last season. But again, it just feels like a janky offense. They don't necessarily actually go fast, but they give up a lot of points. So with Temple, I just don't see it with them. I've got them at number 10 in terms of my projector finish. And number 9, I'm going to be going North Texas. North Texas returns nothing from a season ago. That's because North Texas, they had a coaching change in the offseason. And for North Texas, I just don't know if the system is going to be quite the same under Danielle Robinson. Now, if you take a look at what Cleveland State was able to do last season, Cleveland State was a rock-solid program in the Horizon League. They were able to win 23 games. Cleveland State was solid at being able to just D up in general. Now, the big thing for this Cleveland State team was, if you took a look at what they did last year, they generated a bunch of turnovers. They generated over 15 turnovers per game on their opponents. That was one of the best marks in all of college basketball. Dylan Arndt, he's going to be back with this team after he was over at Cleveland State last year, 11 points, 7 boards, so he comes on over with Robinson, and that's going to be able to help just form the chemistry in general, but they're really going to need to bank on David Terrell along with Will McClendon in that backcourt. For David Terrell, he was very good at UTEP at being able to generate turnovers, so at the very least, he is going to be able to fit the style that they are looking for, so that's something that you do like to see. And Will McClendon, he's a former top 100 recruit, began his career over at UCLA, was solid over at San Jose State last year, 12 points per game, shot 35% from three-point range. He's able to give up 3 assists per game. Not a guy that's going to turn the ball over a ton, but you're relying upon someone like just shy of Shackelford to be able to give you some good production. Buddy Hammer, he's coming on over from the non-Division I level. Is he going to be able to take that step up, help this team out? You've also got a guy like another non-Division I transfer in Kamai Crosby that they're looking for very big things from. I just don't know if they're going to get them, and that puts a lot of pressure on someone like Shackelford, who at 6'9", he began his career over at Florida Gulf Coast last season, was limited to 14 games due to injury. I've got a lot of question marks in terms of what you're going to be able to get outside of your main guys, like McClendon, Arnett, along with David Terrell. These guys are rock solid. Outside of those main 3 guys, I just don't think that you've got the depth to really run that system that was so good for Cleveland State last season. So, as a result, I've got North Texas at number 9 in terms of my projector finish. At number 8, I'm going to be going Tulsa. I do think that Tulsa takes some strides forward this year. They don't really have a ton returning from a season ago, but I know that I've been talking on this podcast with one of our good friends, Riley Frayne, and he was talking up Tulsa either a time or two when he was on this podcast, and I'm in agreement with him that Miles Barnstable coming on over from St. Thomas, where he was able to give the team 14 points per contest, that was a relatively rock-solid ad. Miles Rigsby was a starter for that NCAA tournament Troy team. He's going to be able to help out a little bit more defensively as well. At 6'6", he's a little bit of a gadget combo guy, and then you've got another Bill Ford tough guy on this team. You've got Terrence Ford, who he comes over after at Arkansas State, 9 points, 5 assists per contest. He's going to be the best facilitator that they've had really since Eric Kunkel took the reins, because even though PJ Haggerty was an amazing scorer a few seasons ago, he wasn't quite the facilitator that Ford is, and I think that that is going to be able to help this team out moving forward. I do have a little bit of concern for this team down low. Dorian Ochekwa, hopefully I said that correct, he's a 6'11" big man that they're really going to be looking to for some big minutes this year after he last season was not with the team, and last season he was able to be relatively productive when he was over at Georgia Tech, not much of a scorer, but he averaged 4.9 rebounds per game. Problem was he was only able to get out there for 10 games. Romad Dean, who began his career over at Fordham, and he's a guy with a little bit of versatility. He's a nice rebounder. He's going to be help out as well, but here's what I think is a real X factor. David Green, when he is clicking on all cylinders, this was a very rock-solid player over at Rhode Island last 2 years. Last year, 14 points per contest, shot 43% from 3, 6 rebounds per game. Problem was the Rhode Island team around him just was not that great, but I think that there's a little bit of upside with Tulsa. I think that they claw their way more towards the middle of the conference. I've got them at number 8 in my projector finish. At number 7, I'm going to be going Tulane. This is a big, giant put-up or shut-up year for Tulane, because we have seen a good coach in Ron Hunter just simply not get the job done. 12-6 in the conference last year was nice strides forward, and they do bring back Rome Brumba. 14 points. He was able to supply about 5 assists per contest, shot 36% from 3. Asher Woods, Greg Glenn. These were a pair of guys that averaged about 22 points per game between the two of them. Those are rock-solid pieces, but what has been the issue for Tulane over the last few years, and I do think that that might be the case once again here this year, are they going to be able to have the depth to really be able to bust through? Are they they going to be able to have 6'9" Percy Daniels be able to give you a little bit more than he did 8 seasons ago? As Percy Daniels last year, he was only able to give you right around about 1.5 points per contest. He was a guy that saw minutes in all these games, but wasn't really able to put up too much of anything. They're going to need Curtis Williams to be able to step up along Scotty Middleton. Middleton was a pretty rock-solid player over at Ohio State and Seton Hall, a former top 75 recruit last season over at Seton Hall. He was able to give the team about 6 points per contest and is a 41.5% three-point shooter. That is certainly going to be able to elevate this team, but the big thing for Tulane, are they going to be able to keep that defensive tenacity that we saw at times last season? They did a nice job of being able to guard the three-point line, and for this bunch, they were able to have quite a bit of shot blocking down low with Caleb Banks, but Caleb Banks was a little bit of a do-it-all guy that is no longer with the team. I think that loss is relatively big for them. This was a pretty average three-point shooting team that really couldn't pull in offensive rebounds, and they didn't do a lot to be able to address that in the offseason. JoJo Moore is a guy that they're going to be looking to after he was a solid player over at Oral Roberts last year, but I just feel like this is once again a little bit of a top-heavy team that isn't going to be able to haul in those offensive rebounds, and I think that's going to limit them to being towards the middle of the conference. I've got Tulane as a result at number 7 in terms of my projector or finish, and I do think that Ron Hunter is starting to be a little bit overrated as a coach. Number 6, I do go with Wichita State. I do think that Paul Mills is a little bit of a better coach than what we saw in the first 2 years out of him. At the same time, I do think that it's fair to be questioning him at this point. He brings in Keenan Giles, who was over at Radford and UNC Greensboro, and at Greensboro last year, he was an incredible scorer, 40% three-point shooter, 15 points per game. He is fitting exactly what Paul Mills is looking for. You're just not going to have the same size as the team at 8 seasons ago. Maybe that'll be a little bit of a good thing, because we recall those Oral Roberts teams that he was able to have so much success with. They really didn't have a lot of size either, but they did have versatility, and I just don't know if the versatility is going to be there for Wichita State. Now they've got a clunky big man in Mr. Quincy Ballard out of the fold, but what do you really return from last season as well? It's darn near nothing. Karan Boyd is going to need to fill the void, as he was able to give the team 7 boards, 8.5 points per game when he was over at ETSU last season, but he only stands right around about 6'5". This is going to be a very undersized team. They're going to be looking to the Monmouth transfer in Jared Valencia to really be able to bounce back with his three-point shooting as well. 2 years ago, Jared Valencia at 6'9" was shooting darn near 40% from 3. Last year, closer to 34% from 3, only about 7 points per contest over at Monmouth. I just don't know what you're going to be able to get out of him. Michael Gray, he was a nice double-figure scorer over at Nichols last season, but I just don't know what he's going to be able to add for this team as well. You're looking at Drake Kindle as well. He's coming on over after he was at the non-Division I ranks, putting up big numbers, but again, that is going to be a big giant jump, and other than Wilberg, who's a 6'10", little bit of a clunky big man, you just don't have a ton with regards to this team down low. Emmanuel Okafor comes on over from Louisville, but he was unable to see some great minutes there over at Seton Hall last year. He was glued to the bench as well, so do have some massive question marks with Wichita State with regards to their post play. The three-point shooting is improved, and I do think that helps Wichita State climb a little bit more, but still, I think that they're going to be more towards the middle of the conference. I've got them at number 6 in terms of my projector finish. This is going to surprise a lot of people, but at number 5, I've got Florida Atlantic. I look at Cannon Carlisle and AJ Sam McRae. These are 2 big-time upside guys that pair really well with Nicolo Moretti, who he is going to be back from a season ago with Moretti. He was a part of a just really nice core where they had, I think it was 8 different guys that gave you at least 6.2 points per contest. Moretti last year was shooting about 35% from 3, threw in their 3.5 assists per contest. He is really going to be the man that is going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit this season, and for Cannon Carlisle, if he could just play off the ball, and if he could be the scorer that we saw over at Stanford a few seasons ago, like he had a massive burner run in his first 10 games with Stanford where he was averaging darn near 15 plus points per contest. That's going to be huge, because at Indiana last year, shot a paltry 24% from 3. It's very clear that style did not suit him. Now, what is going to be true with him? Is he the guy that we saw absolutely explode at Stanford for his first few games? Is he the guy that stunk it up at Indiana last year? I think that it's somewhere between A and B, and AJ Sam McRae, he's a guy that spent some time with Miami last year. You go back to what he did 2 years ago at Sam Amford, shot 41% from 3, 4.5 points, 11.5 points, and he was able to give you a steal and a half per contest at 6'5". This is going to be a really hard guy to guard. Now, they do lose quite a bit with not having Baba Miller down low from a season ago, but I think that Devin Williams, who just was unable to see playing time over at UCLA, was limited to 9 games due to injury and just a whole big giant whatchamado, I think that he's going to be able to step up. And Elijah Elliott, he's a highly touted freshman that went a little bit under the radar. He's going to be able to give you quite a bit in the backcourt right away, in my opinion. Now, this is a team that's going to be dealing with a little bit of depth issues, so they're going to need someone like an Isaiah Holmlin, hopefully I said that correct, coming over from USC where he was very limited. They're going to need him to be able to take some strides forward, but I mean, there is a lot of upside guys here with Florian Lang. There's a lot of overall talent that I think really starts to flourish here. So I've got them at number 5 in my projector finish. And number 4, meet me for the Roadrunners of UTSA. I actually really like Coach Austin Claunch. They bring back one of the best overall scorers in all of college basketball last year in Primo Spears. And Primo Spears, back when he was playing over at the likes of Florida State, he began his career over at Duquesne, Georgetown. This guy is a long and winding road. He's always been a good scorer, but he was always a little bit of a chucker. He would just take bad threes. He improved his three-point shooting to 36% last year, actually doled out the ball with 4 assists per game, could do without the 2.5 turnovers per game, but that's honestly not too bad because UTSA under Austin Claunch, I think that they're really going to be looking to generate a lot of turnovers. Last year, they were a top 20 team in terms of turnovers forced per game with over 15. Vashawn Alouette, I think, is going to be a nice ancillary piece for helping to do so. He had a big year 2 years ago, and he was over at Old Dominion. Last season, he over at TCU was a nice 11.5 point per game score. It's not often that you're able to get a Big 12 starter into a school like UTSA. Backcourt is going to be rock solid. You do have to have a few question marks down low with this team. They really don't have anyone that's taller than 6'7", so Jesus Calero, he's going to need to give this team some good versatility. He was rock solid over at Campbell. Just had a loss year over at Missouri 2 years ago. Was able to rebound a bit at Bethune-Cookman last year, so this is a guy that's been a little bit all over the place, but I think the real X factor here is Jameer Simpson. Jameer Simpson comes on over from Southern Utah. He fits exactly what this team needs. He was able to be a 16 point per game scorer, 4.5 boards, shot right around about 34% from 3. Not necessarily a guy that's going to generate a lot of turnovers, but I mean, that's why you've got everyone else around you. Raekwon Horton is another guy that's back from a season ago. He put up good numbers at UTSA, dealt with a little bit of injury. A clean bill of health, I think, is going to do him some good, and I think that UTSA is ready to climb. I've got them at number 4 in terms of my projector finish. At number 3, I do go with UAB. With UAB, they do lose so much from last season with the likes of Yaxel Lendeborg, Alejandro Vasquez, don't call his name, out from a season ago. So Ephraim Johnson is that main returner. He was able to average 9 points per game last year, but you go back to what he was able to do 2 years ago, shot 36% from 3, 11 points per contest in a little bit of a more prominent role. I think that they're going to need him to step up, and I think that he's going to be able to do so. I think that they have brought in some nice Wiley transfers to be able to help him do so. You had Jacob Meyer when he was over at Coastal Carolina, when he was a little bit more of a feature guy, be able to put up double figures. Last year over at DePaul, he had a solid season for a team that was able to surprise quite a few people. For Jacob Meyer, not necessarily going to be going into flamethrower mode from three-point range, but I mean, he's a career 36.5% three-point shooter that is able to give you some rebounding when he was over at Coastal Carolina. 5 boards, a steal, 2.5 assists per game. So he has proven that he's able to be the man, and he should be able to lift a lot of pressure off of Ephraim Johnson. And I'm just going to say it straight up. I do think that with Andy Kennedy, he always is going to be able to do with more with less. You go all the way back to his time at Ole Miss, he dragged some of those teams to the middle part of the SEC when they had no business of doing so, and bringing in a guy like a Daniel Rivera, who's able to give you 2 assists, 12.5 points, 7.5 boards, all sorts of versatility from Bryant and UMass. Not a guy that's going to light you up from 3, but UAB typically not a great three-point shooting team. That's big, and Kyron Lindsey is a guy that really goes under the radar. I still remember his freshman year over at Georgia, he was leading the team in rebounding before he left like midway through the season, something like that. At Murray State last season, he just didn't get the role that he was looking for. 6.5 points, 4.5 boards, a block per contest. I think that he steps in right away, makes big contributions, shores things up for this team down low. UAB always tenacious on the defensive side of things, and I think that they're going to be able to do so once again. And Chance Westery, he's a very highly touted guy that I think has a lot of upside. So I've got a number 3 in my projector finish UAB. Number 2, I go with Memphis. With Memphis, you've got a lot of like former top 100 guys. Aaron Bradshaw, a 7'1" big man that could never really find it over at Ohio State. And when he was at Kentucky, he was dealing with a lot of injuries. But is he going to be able to gel with these guys is a question. Doug McDaniel put up solid numbers over at Kansas State last year. 11.5 points, 5 assists per contest, but he's not necessarily the world's greatest three-point shooter. He shot 26% last year, albeit at Michigan, he shot more like 37% from three-point range. But I just don't know if the system suits them well. Memphis always has a tough time in terms of taking care of the ball. It doesn't matter who they bring in. They just have turnover after turnover. You can tell that they could have really used PJ Haggerty back. Now, Hassan Abdul-Hakim is a 6'8", do-it-all player that comes on over from the UT Grand Valley Vaqueros, who I really like. 13.5 points, 7 boards. He was limited to like 12 games last year due to injury, and he's over the last 2 years, so with injury, but He's a guy with a lot of upside. Conte Berry, he knows all about the conference. He was over at Temple Goels last season, one of their main wing players for them. Sincere Parker, I sincerely think, has a lot of upside as well. He was rock solid over at McNeese last season. He was a nice scorer over at St. Louis a few seasons ago as well, but you've only got one ball out there. Julius Redford, he's a guy with a little bit of upside as well, but I just don't know how it's necessarily going to work, and I feel a little bit better about the coaching with the number 1 team. So I've got Memphis at number 2 in my projector, finish at number 1, I've got South Florida. Now, I do recognize that when it comes to Brian Hodgson, he didn't bring over a ton of guys that he coached over at Arkansas State, but he did bring in one big guy. That would be Isaiah Nelson, and I think that Nelson is going to be very good down low. 10.5 points, 9 boards for the Arkansas State Red Wolves last season, so he knows the system very well. 2 years ago, he was able to get 2 blocks per contest as well. And then Joseph Pignon, he's a rock-solid player that began his career over at Arkansas. He's another guy that's going to be following Hodgson after he was able to put up 12 points, was a nice 36% three-point shooter. Hodgson did a really nice job of being able to instill some defense into the team, and they've got a nice combination of guys that maybe were at the power conference level and didn't necessarily see the minutes that they wanted, and other guys that they were able to put up good numbers at the mid-major ranks. Damian Collins is someone that was a former top 50 recruit over at LSU. He was able to put up some solid numbers last year. 8 points, 4.5 rebounds per game at the SEC level. You'll certainly take that. Xavier Brown was a go-to scorer last year over at James Madison. He's able to generate a few turnovers. Nice defensive guard. Also a guy that's able to light you up when it comes to his overall shooting as well. And Josh Omajafo, I really like what he was able to do over at Robert Morris last year. He was able to come onto the scene, shot 38.5% for 3, 11.5 points as a 6'5", do-it-all sort of player. This team has really, really good depth. Like CJ Brown is back from a season ago after he made some solid contributions with this team. You also have Deontay Green who's back. He began his career over at Florida State. He stands right around about 6'9", 6'10", and for Green, he was putting up 6.5 points, 4.5 boards. He's a former top 150 recruit. I really like this South Florida team. I really like Brian Hodgson as a coach. They've got depth. They're going to play good defense. They've got plenty of shooting. Devin Ade, he's a guy that comes on over from Central Connecticut too. He's going to factor into things. I've got South Florida at number 1 in terms of my projector or finish, and that wraps things up for the American Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. A big thanks to one of our good friends in Mr. Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to throw those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @Unit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I am indeed with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. You've got 6 more conference previews, the Atlantic 10 and the Power 5 after this, so be on the lookout for those. We've got a lot of great chats coming up, and we're about a month and a half away from the start of the college basketball season, so rejoice in the fact that you're going to get a fresh podcast tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.